Billionaire lost control when his ex wouldn't sign the divorce, until a photo showed her with twins. Welcome to Secrets Narrated. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. When the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and share what you felt along the way. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with twists and hidden truths, make sure to follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss the next one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy every detail. The mahogany desk in Marcus Halstead's corner office reflected the cold, December light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 46, he commanded respect in every boardroom across 3 continents. His strategic consulting empire built on precision, control, and the ability to solve problems that others deemed impossible. But today, one problem remained stubbornly unsolved. Marcus loosened his charcoal tie, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the divorce papers that had been sitting unsigned for 3 weeks. The deadline loomed, December 31st. New year, new contracts, new image, clean slate. Mr. Halstead? His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Davidson is on line 2. Marcus pressed the button with more force than necessary. What's the update, Richard? His lawyer's sigh was audible even through the phone. She's postponed again. Says she needs more time to review the terms. More time? Marcus stood, his 6'2" frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. We've been at this for 8 months. The settlement is more than generous. What could she possibly need to review? I don't know, Marcus. Maybe you should call her yourself. The suggestion hit like ice water. Call Elise. The woman who had walked out of their penthouse 18 months ago without a backward glance. The woman who had systematically removed herself from his life as efficiently as she had once organized it. Marcus ended the call and walked to the window, his reflection staring back. Sharp jawline, dark hair with distinguished silver at the temples. Expensive suit tailored to perfection. Everything about him screamed success, power, control. Everything except this one loose thread that refused to be cut. Their marriage had been practical, strategic even. Elise Warren, 34, elegant and intelligent, had been the perfect companion for his world of high-stakes negotiations and international dealings. She understood the demands of his schedule, adapted to the constant relocations, and never complained about the long hours or last-minute trips. Until that night at the Grandview Hotel. Marcus pushed the memory away, but it surfaced anyway. The way Elise's face had crumpled when he introduced her to the Blackstone investors as someone who's with me tonight. Not his wife, not his partner, just someone. He had been focused on closing the biggest deal of his career. She had been focused on being acknowledged as his equal. The argument that followed had been swift and final. You need to understand your place, Elise. This business is bigger than us. The words had come out harsher than he intended, but the damage was done. She had looked at him like she was seeing a stranger, and maybe she was. Within a month, she was gone. Marcus returned to his desk, fingers drumming against the leather surface. The logical part of his brain knew he should be relieved. The marriage had run its course. They wanted different things, but the delay in signing felt personal, like she was holding something over him. His phone buzzed. A text from his brother James. Drinks tonight? You look like you need it. Marcus typed back. Can't. Working late. When aren't you? It's almost New Year, man. Live a little. Live a little. As if life was something that happened outside of conference rooms and profit margins. Marcus had built his entire existence around achievement, around being indispensable, around never showing weakness. Elise had been the only person who had seen through that facade, and now she was the only person standing between him and the clean break he needed. He pulled up her contact information, thumb hovering over the call button. Would she even answer? They hadn't spoken directly since the lawyers took over, communicating only through legal documents and formal procedures. But this was different. This was about control, about ending things on his terms. Marcus hesitated. Something about Elise's behavior didn't add up. She wasn't vindictive or manipulative. During their marriage, she had been straightforward, sometimes painfully honest. If she wanted something from him, she would have asked for it directly. So why the delays? Why the silence? The city lights began to twinkle below as evening settled over Manhattan. Somewhere out there, Elise was living a life he knew nothing about. The thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Marcus closed the divorce papers and slid them into his briefcase. Tomorrow, he would handle this personally. No more lawyers, no more delays. He would get his answers and his signature. One way or another, this would end before the new year. But as he gathered his things to leave, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important, something that would change everything he thought he knew about why Elise Warren refused to let him go. What secret was she keeping that made signing those papers impossible? Elise Warren pulled her wool coat tighter as she stepped out of the pediatrician's office. 2 car seats balanced carefully in her arms. The December wind cut through the Manhattan streets, but she barely felt it. Her mind was elsewhere, on the vaccination schedule, the grocery list, and the stack of legal documents waiting on her kitchen counter. At 34, she had once commanded boardrooms as a strategic communications consultant. Her mind had been sharp, focused on quarterly projections and market analyses. Now, her biggest achievement was getting both twins to sleep through the night. The irony wasn't lost on her. Mrs. Warren, the young receptionist, had called her that during the appointment, and Elise hadn't corrected her. Technically, she was still Mrs. Halstead. The papers remained unsigned, sitting in her small Brooklyn apartment like a bomb she wasn't ready to defuse. The subway ride home was a careful ballet of managing 2 sleeping infants while avoiding the curious stares of other passengers. Some smiled knowingly, other parents recognizing the exhaustion in her eyes. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the reality of single motherhood in designer boots that were 3 seasons old. Elise's brownstone apartment was a far cry from the penthouse she had shared with Marcus. 2 bedrooms, exposed brick, and a kitchen barely large enough for 1 person, let alone the chaos of bottles, formula, and baby equipment that had taken over every surface. But it was hers. She settled the twins, Oliver and Emma, into their shared nursery, watching as they stirred but didn't wake. Oliver had Marcus's strong jawline, even at 14 months. Emma had inherited his intensity, those same steel-gray eyes that could cut through pretense and see straight to the truth. Elise wondered if Marcus's eyes still held that same penetrating quality, or if success had finally made him as polished and impenetrable as the marble facades of his office buildings. In the kitchen, she made coffee with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion. The legal documents waited where she had left them, next to a pile of medical bills and a photo album she hadn't had the courage to open. Richard Davidson's latest message was polite but firm. Ms. Warren, we need to finalize these proceedings before year-end. Mr. Halstead's patience is wearing thin. Marcus's patience, the phrase would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. During their marriage, his patience had been conditional, based on her ability to be the perfect corporate wife, to smile at the right moments, and disappear when convenient. She remembered the exact moment she realized their marriage was over. The Grandview Hotel, the Blackstone deal, the most important night of Marcus's career, and she had been excited to be part of it. She had chosen her dress carefully, midnight blue silk that made her feel elegant and confident. She had rehearsed conversations, prepared to discuss the economic implications of the merger with the precision Marcus admired. Instead, he had introduced her like an accessory. This is someone who's with me tonight. Not Elise, not his wife, someone. The investors had barely acknowledged her before turning back to Marcus, and she had stood there feeling invisible, feeling like everything she had sacrificed for their marriage had been reduced to nothing. But it was his response afterward that had truly ended things. You need to understand your place, Elise. This business is bigger than us. Your place. As if she were an employee who had overstepped boundaries rather than the woman who had given up her own consulting firm to support his dreams. Elise sipped her coffee and looked at the unsigned documents. Marcus wanted closure, wanted to move forward without the messy complications of their shared past. He probably saw her delays as vindictive, as some kind of power play. He had no idea that she woke up every morning terrified of the moment she would have to look him in the eye and tell him about Oliver and Emma. The pregnancy had been discovered 3 weeks after she moved out. A routine checkup that changed everything. Twins, due in August. Marcus's children, conceived during one of their last attempts to save their failing marriage. She had sat in the doctor's office, divorce papers in her purse, staring at the ultrasound images of 2 perfect heartbeats. For weeks, she had planned to tell him. She would call, ask to meet, explain that their separation was more complicated than either of them had anticipated. But then she remembered his words. This business is bigger than us. If their marriage wasn't important enough to prioritize, how would he react to unplanned children who would demand time, attention, and emotional availability he had never been willing to give? Elise had made the hardest decision of her life. She would handle this alone. The twins were born healthy and beautiful, and every day since had been a delicate balance of love and exhaustion. She worked freelance consulting from home, taking whatever projects she could manage between feedings and nap times. Her savings were dwindling, her career was stagnant, but she had never regretted her choice. Until the legal deadlines started mounting. Marcus wanted his freedom and she wanted to give it to him. But signing those papers meant more than ending their marriage. It meant officially acknowledging that their children would grow up without their father, that she had chosen to keep them apart, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. Emma's cry echoed from the nursery, followed quickly by Oliver's. Elise set down her coffee and headed toward the sound, her heart both breaking and swelling at the same time. As she lifted Emma from her crib, she caught sight of herself in the nursery mirror. Gone was the polished consultant who had once matched Marcus's ambition with her own. In her place was a woman with tired eyes and formula stains on her sweater, a woman who measured success in smiles and first words rather than profit margins, but also a woman who had learned that some things truly were bigger than business, even if Marcus would never understand that. Marcus stood outside the brownstone building in Park Slope, his Bentley looking conspicuously out of place among the family-friendly cafes and vintage bookshops. He had tracked down Elise's address through his private investigator, a move that felt both necessary and invasive. For 18 months he had imagined her living somewhere sleek and modern, probably in the Upper East Side, using her settlement money to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to during their marriage. Instead, he found himself in Brooklyn, staring at a building that screamed domesticity and compromise. The December afternoon was crisp, his breath visible in small clouds as he climbed the steps to the front door. He had rehearsed this conversation during the drive over. But now that he was here, the words felt inadequate. The building's lobby was small, but well-maintained, with mailboxes bearing handwritten labels. E. Warren, 3B was written in the same careful script he remembered from grocery lists and birthday cards. Marcus took the stairs two at a time, his Italian leather shoes echoing against the worn wooden steps. At the third floor, he paused outside her door, suddenly aware that he was about to cross a line they had established months ago. No contact except through lawyers, but those papers needed to be signed, and Marcus Halstead had built his empire on direct negotiation. He knocked. The sound of footsteps approached, then stopped. Through the peephole, he knew she was studying him, deciding whether to open the door or pretend she wasn't home. The lock clicked. Elise opened the door just wide enough to see him, her hand gripping the frame. She looked different, softer somehow, though there were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a cream-colored sweater that had seen better days. Marcus. Her voice was carefully neutral. Elise. He took in the narrow hallway behind her, the sound of what might have been a television playing children's music. We need to talk. I told Richard I need more time. You've had 8 months. Marcus stepped closer, not aggressively, but with the kind of presence that had intimidated boardrooms full of executives. What's really going on? She didn't move aside to let him in. Instead, she stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind her as if protecting something inside. You can't just show up here, Marcus. We have procedures in place for a reason. Procedures that aren't working. He studied her face, looking for the tells he had learned to read during their marriage. The way her left eye twitched slightly when she was hiding something. The way she pressed her lips together when she was fighting back words she didn't want to say. Both signs were there now. The settlement is generous, he continued. More than generous. You'll be financially secure for the rest of your life. What could you possibly need to review that takes this long? Elise looked down at her hands. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? The question hung between them in the narrow hallway. From somewhere behind the door came a sound that made Marcus pause. A baby's cry, quickly followed by another. His eyebrows furrowed. Do you have company? Marcus, you should go. But he was already processing what he had heard. Twin cries. In Elise's apartment, the protective way she had positioned herself in front of the door suddenly made sense. Elise. His voice was lower now, more careful. Whose children are in there? She closed her eyes, and he saw her shoulders sag slightly, as if she had been carrying a weight too heavy to bear alone. Please don't do this, she whispered. Don't do what? Ask questions about why my ex-wife is hiding something from me. They're not your concern. The words hit him like a physical blow, not his concern. But the timing, the secrecy, the way she couldn't meet his eyes, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was solving began to fall into place. How old? His voice was barely audible. Elise opened her eyes, and for the first time since he had known her, she looked defeated. Marcus, how old are they? 14 months. The math was simple and devastating. 14 months meant conception around October of the previous year. October, when they had been trying to save their marriage with weekend getaways and desperate attempts at intimacy. October, just weeks before the Blackstone dinner that had ended everything. Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet. Mine? Elise didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. Behind the door, the crying intensified, and Marcus heard Elise's sharp intake of breath. Her maternal instincts were at war with her desire to keep him away, and he could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. I have to go to them, she said finally. Elise, wait. But she was already opening the door, slipping inside, leaving him standing alone in the hallway with the magnitude of her revelation crushing down around him. Through the thin walls he could hear her voice, soft and soothing, comforting children he had never met. Children who were his. Marcus leaned against the wall, his carefully ordered world tilting off its axis. For 18 months he had believed their separation was clean, final, uncomplicated. He had moved forward with his life, his business, his plans for the future. He had never imagined that Elise had been raising his children alone while he demanded her signature on divorce papers. The crying stopped, replaced by Elise's gentle humming, a melody he didn't recognize but that seemed to reach straight through the door and into his chest. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to process what he had just learned. He was a father, had been a father for over a year without knowing it. While he had been building his empire and planning his clean break from the past, 2 children had been taking their first steps, saying their first words, growing up without him. The door opened again and Elise emerged with red-rimmed eyes. Now you know, she said quietly. Why? The word came out rougher than he intended. Why didn't you tell me? Elise looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, part sadness, part resignation, part something that might have been pity. Because, she said, I knew exactly what you would say. I knew that they would become another business decision to you, another problem to solve or control, and I couldn't bear the thought of my children being seen as anything less than the miracles they are. The words hung between them like an accusation, and a truth he wasn't ready to face. Marcus sat in his car outside the brownstone for 20 minutes, engine running, heat blasting against the December cold. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He was a father. The thought circled through his mind like a mantra he couldn't quite believe. 2 children, twins, had been living and breathing and growing while he negotiated contracts and traveled between cities, completely unaware that his DNA was shaping 2 small faces he had never seen. His phone buzzed. James again. Dinner at 8? Rebecca wants to meet you. Marcus stared at the text. His brother's life seemed suddenly foreign. Casual dinners, new girlfriends, the luxury of simplicity. How could he explain that in the span of 30 minutes his entire understanding of himself had shifted? He turned off the engine and walked back to the building. This time, when Elise opened the door, she didn't look surprised. Her eyes were puffy from crying, but her posture was straighter, as if the weight of her secret had been partially lifted. I thought you might come back, she said. I need to see them. The words came out more vulnerable than he intended. For a man who commanded billion-dollar deals, asking to meet his own children felt like begging. Elise studied his face for a long moment, then stepped aside. The apartment was smaller than his office bathroom, but it radiated warmth. Children's toys were scattered across a colorful rug, and the walls were covered with family photos, none of which included him. The scent of baby powder and something sweet, possibly applesauce, lingered in the air. They just woke up from their nap, Elise said quietly. They might be cranky. She led him toward a sunny room at the back of the apartment. Marcus followed, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that reminded him of his first major presentation, except this felt infinitely more important and terrifying. The nursery was painted a soft yellow, with 2 cribs positioned side by side. Between them sat a rocking chair that looked like it had seen countless late-night feedings. Oliver, Elise called gently. Emma, come meet Daddy. The word hung in the air like a prayer and a question mark. 2 toddlers emerged from behind the cribs, where they had been playing with blocks. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Oliver was unmistakably his son, the same strong jawline, the same dark hair that would probably turn wavy as he got older. the same serious expression Marcus wore when evaluating a complex problem. The boy looked at Marcus with curious steel-gray eyes that were like looking into a mirror. Emma was more delicate but equally recognizable. She had inherited his intensity but softened it with something that was purely Elise. A warmth in her expression, a readiness to smile. Her hair was lighter, more auburn like her mother's, but her eyes were the same shade of gray that had intimidated business rivals for 2 decades. "Hi," Marcus said, then immediately felt foolish. "What did you say to children you'd never met? What did you say to your children?" Oliver regarded him solemnly, then toddled over to where Marcus had crouched down. Without warning, the boy reached out and grabbed Marcus's tie, examining the silk fabric with the focused attention of someone conducting important research. "He likes textures," Elise explained, her voice barely above a whisper, "especially smooth things." Emma was more cautious, staying close to her mother but watching Marcus with the kind of intelligent observation that suggested she was filing away every detail for later consideration. "Can I?" Marcus looked at Elise, unsure how to finish the question. "Of course. They're your children too." The simple statement carried the weight of 18 months of decisions, sacrifices, and sleepless nights that Marcus had missed. He reached out tentatively and touched Oliver's hand. The boy's fingers were impossibly small and warm, his grip surprisingly strong when he wrapped his tiny fist around Marcus's index finger. Something fundamental shifted in Marcus's chest. A door he hadn't known existed suddenly swinging open. "How do you do this?" he asked Elise. "How do you take care of them both by yourself?" "You learn," she said simply. "You adapt. You love them more than you thought possible, and somehow that makes everything else manageable." Emma had crept closer during their conversation and was now studying Marcus's watch with the same methodical attention her brother had given his tie. When she looked up at him, Marcus saw something that made his throat tighten, a smile that was purely his own, the same slightly crooked grin that had charmed investors and melted opposition for decades. "Dada?" Emma said experimentally, testing the word. The sound hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had negotiated with heads of state, presented to boards of directors, made decisions that affected thousands of employees, but hearing his daughter say that single word reduced him to something raw and unprotected. "I'm sorry," he said to Elise, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what he had missed. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry you had to do this alone. I'm sorry I was such a—" "Don't," Elise interrupted. "Not in front of them. Children absorb everything, even things you think they're too young to understand." Oliver had released Marcus's finger and was now trying to climb into his lap, apparently having decided that this new person was sufficiently trustworthy for closer investigation. Marcus lifted his son carefully, amazed by how light and solid he felt at the same time. "He looks just like you," Elise observed. "He looks like you too," Marcus replied, and it was true. Oliver had inherited Elise's curiosity, her fearlessness in approaching new situations. They sat in the nursery for the next hour, watching the twins play, learning their personalities and quirks. Oliver was methodical and serious, approaching each toy like a problem to solve. Emma was more social, chattering in the half-words of toddlerhood and seeming to expect responses to her observations about blocks and stuffed animals. As evening approached and the twins began to show signs of hunger and fatigue, Marcus realized he had never felt so simultaneously complete and terrified. "I want to be part of this," he said, as Elise prepared bottles. "I want to be their father. Really be their father, not just a signature on legal documents." Elise looked at him over Emma's head. "That's what I was afraid you'd say." "Afraid? Because now I have to decide if I believe you. If I believe that this won't become another business arrangement for you. If I believe you're capable of putting them first when your empire demands your attention." The challenge in her voice was clear, and Marcus realized that seeing his children was only the beginning. The real test would be proving that he could become the man they deserved as a father, and that might require becoming someone entirely different from the man he had been. 3 weeks into January, Marcus found himself standing in the baby aisle of a Brooklyn Target, completely overwhelmed by the variety of sippy cups available for purchase. He held his phone to his ear, listening to his assistant reschedule meetings he should have been attending. "Mr. Halstead, the Tokyo call has been moved to 9 p.m. your time, and the Singapore team is requesting a video conference tomorrow at 6 a.m. "Cancel it," Marcus said, picking up a cup with cartoon dinosaurs on it. "Move everything to Thursday." "Sir, that's the 3rd time this week you've—" "I understand the implications, Rebecca. Just do it." He ended the call and added the cup to his cart. which already contained an assortment of items he'd never imagined needing to know about: teething rings, organic baby food, and a stuffed elephant that Oliver had pointed to during their last visit to the toy store. The past month had been a crash course in fatherhood that no MBA program could have prepared him for. Marcus had gone from seeing Elise and the twins twice a week to nearly every day, learning that children operated on schedules that had nothing to do with corporate efficiency and everything to do with naps, snacks, and emotional needs that couldn't be negotiated. His penthouse, once a monument to minimalist sophistication, now had a corner dedicated to toys and child-proofing equipment. His housekeeper had quit after finding crayon marks on his Italian leather sofa, a casualty of Emma's artistic exploration during one of their afternoon visits. But the most challenging part wasn't the lifestyle adjustments. It was learning to navigate the complex relationship with Elise, who watched his every interaction with the twins, like she was evaluating his worthiness for a promotion he desperately wanted, but wasn't sure he deserved. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his brother James. "Haven't seen you in weeks, everything okay?" Before he could respond, another message appeared. "Rebecca called Mom. She's worried you're having some kind of breakdown." Marcus almost laughed. A breakdown. His family had no idea that he was actually having the opposite. He was finally understanding what it meant to build something that mattered. He finished shopping and drove to Elise's apartment, where he had been invited for dinner. It was a small gesture, but significant. For the past month, their interactions had been carefully structured around the children's schedules, with minimal personal conversation. Tonight felt different, like a test he wasn't sure how to pass. Elise answered the door wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. She looked more relaxed than he'd seen her in months, though there was still a wariness in her expression when she looked at him. "Perfect timing," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "They're just finishing their dinner." The twins were in their high chairs, covered in what appeared to be spaghetti sauce, and cheerfully making a mess that would have horrified the Marcus of 2 months ago. Today he found their chaos oddly endearing. "Dada!" Emma called out, reaching toward him with sauce-covered hands. The word still hit him like a small miracle every time he heard it. He kissed the top of her head, accepting the transfer of tomato sauce to his custom-tailored shirt without complaint. Oliver, more reserved as always, studied Marcus with serious eyes before offering him a piece of bread he'd been saving. "He only shares with people he really likes," Elise observed, cleaning Emma's face with practiced efficiency. "Is that right?" Marcus accepted the bread solemnly, treating it like the gift it was. "Thank you, Oliver." They moved to the living room after dinner, where Marcus found himself sitting on the floor while the twins used him as a jungle gym. Oliver had discovered that Marcus's watch made interesting sounds when tapped, while Emma seemed determined to unbraid his shoelaces. "You're getting better at this," Elise said from the couch, watching as Marcus successfully redirected Emma from his shoes to a more appropriate toy. "I'm trying." He looked up at her. "I know I have a lot to make up for." "It's not about making up for anything, Marcus. It's about showing up now, consistently, even when it's hard or inconvenient or not what you planned." The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. During their marriage, Marcus had been excellent at showing up for events that mattered to his business, but had consistently missed the smaller moments that mattered to Elise. Birthday dinners cut short for conference calls. Weekend getaways interrupted by emergencies that could have waited until Monday. A pattern of prioritizing everything except the people who should have come first. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about the divorce papers." Elise's posture tensed slightly. "What about them?" "I don't want to sign them." The admission hung between them like a live wire. Emma had fallen asleep against Marcus's chest, her small body warm and trusting, and he adjusted his position carefully to avoid waking her. "Marcus, not because I want to trap you or complicate things," he said quickly, "but because I want to try. I want to see if we can be a family. Really be a family, not just co-parents who coordinate schedules." Elise was quiet for a long moment, watching Oliver stack blocks with the methodical precision he'd inherited from his father. "You left me once," she said finally. "Not physically, but emotionally. Long before I walked out of that penthouse. You chose your business over our marriage, over us, over everything that should have mattered. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what it felt like to be invisible in your life? To feel like an accessory you could put on for important events and then forget about when something more interesting came along?" The pain in her voice was fresh, despite the months that had passed. Marcus realized that his absence during the twins' first year wasn't just time lost with his children. It was confirmation of every fear Elise had harbored about his priorities. "I can't go back to that," she continued. "I won't let Oliver and Emma grow up feeling like they have to compete with your empire for your attention. They won't have to." Marcus shifted Emma to his shoulder, where she settled with a small sigh. "I'm selling the consulting firm." Elise's eyes widened. "What?" "I've been working with investment bankers for the past 2 weeks. Blackstone is interested in acquiring the entire operation. It would give me liquid capital to start something smaller, more flexible, something that would let me be present for the things that matter. Marcus, you built that company from nothing. It's your life's work." "No," he said, looking down at Emma's peaceful face, then across at Oliver, who had abandoned his blocks to lean against Elise's legs. "This is my life's work. I just didn't realize it until now." The silence that followed was different from the tense quiet that had characterized most of their recent conversations. It felt like possibility, like the space between a question and an answer that could change everything. "I need time to think," Elise said finally. "I know. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm just asking you to believe that I can become the man you and the children deserve, the man I should have been all along." As if sensing the importance of the moment, Oliver chose that instant to toddle over to Marcus and climb into his lap beside his sleeping sister. The weight of both children against his chest felt like the most important responsibility he'd ever been trusted with. And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus understood that success wasn't measured in dollars or deals, but in the trust of 2 small children who called him Dada, and the possibility of earning back the love of the woman who had given him the greatest gift of his life. 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in his attorney's office staring at documents that would dissolve everything he had spent 15 years building. Richard Davidson pushed his glasses up his nose and shuffled through the acquisition papers, with the careful attention of someone who couldn't quite believe what his client was proposing. "You understand that once you sign these, there's no going back," Richard said. "Blackstone is offering $8.2 billion for the firm, but they want complete control. You'll have a 5-year non-compete clause. You can't just rebuild if you change your mind." Marcus picked up his pen. "I won't change my mind." "Marcus, be rational about this. You're 46 years old. This company is your legacy, your life's work. Are you really going to throw it all away for my family?" Marcus's voice was steady. "Yes." Richard sighed and opened another folder. "There's something else. The Blackstone deal comes with conditions. They want you to oversee the transition personally. 3 months in Singapore, minimum. Possibly 6. The pen stilled in Marcus's hand. "That wasn't in the original terms. It's in the fine print. They're paying premium for your expertise, but they want to ensure continuity. You'd be setting up their Asian operations, training their team. It's non-negotiable if you want the full valuation." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. 3 months away from Oliver and Emma. 3 months of missing bedtime stories and first words, and all the small moments that he was just beginning to understand were the most important ones of all. There has to be another way. The next highest offer is $6 billion. Still requires overseas consultation, but only for 6 weeks. $2 billion. The difference was staggering, but Marcus found himself calculating it in terms of security for his children, college funds, the kind of stability that would let Elise pursue her own dreams without financial worry. "I need to think about it." "You have until Friday. After that, both offers expire." Marcus left the law office feeling like he was drowning. He had promised Elise he would be present, had sworn that his business days of putting everything else first were over. But this wasn't just about money. This was about securing their children's future in a way that his current assets, substantial as they were, couldn't match. He drove to Brooklyn, needing to see the twins, needing to ground himself in what mattered most. But when he arrived at Elise's building, he found her loading the twins into a cab. "Perfect timing," she said, though something in her expression suggested otherwise. "Emma's running a fever. We're going to the pediatrician." Marcus immediately moved to help, lifting Oliver while Elise secured Emma's car seat. But as they settled into the cab, he noticed that Elise seemed unusually tense, more worried than a routine fever should warrant. "How long has she been sick?" he asked. "Since this morning. It spiked to 102 about an hour ago." Emma was listless in her car seat, her usually bright eyes dulled with fever. She whimpered softly, and Marcus felt a panic he'd never experienced in any boardroom. "Should we be going to the emergency room instead?" Dr. Martinez said to bring her in. "She'll decide if we need to go to the hospital." Hospital. The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. In his corporate world, problems had solutions. Risks could be calculated and managed. But looking at his sick daughter, he realized how helpless he truly was when it came to the things that actually mattered. At the pediatrician's office, Marcus paced while Elise held Emma, whose fever had climbed to 103. Oliver, sensing the tension, clung to Marcus's leg and refused to be distracted by the waiting room toys. "Mr. and Mrs. Halstead?" A nurse appeared at the doorway. Marcus started to correct her, but Elise spoke first. "That's us." They were led into an examination room where Dr. Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s, began examining Emma with practiced efficiency. "Looks like an ear infection," she said after several minutes. "Common at this age, but painful. The fever should come down once we get her started on antibiotics." Marcus felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "She's going to be okay? She'll be fine, but someone will need to monitor her closely for the next 48 hours. Wake her every few hours to check her temperature, make sure she's staying hydrated." After leaving the pharmacy with Emma's medication, they returned to Elise's apartment. Marcus helped get both children settled while Elise prepared the first dose of antibiotics. Emma fought the medicine, and it took both parents working together to coax her into taking it. "I should stay tonight," Marcus said as they cleaned up the kitchen. "Help monitor her temperature." Elise paused in loading the dishwasher. "You don't have to do that. I've handled sick children before, but you don't have to handle it alone anymore." The simple statement seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, her carefully maintained independence wavered, and Marcus saw the exhaustion she'd been hiding. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." They took turns checking on Emma throughout the night. At 2 a.m., Marcus found Elise sitting in the rocking chair, holding their daughter while she slept fitfully. The sight of them together, Elise's auburn hair falling across her shoulder, Emma's small hand gripping her mother's shirt, struck him as the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Her fever's down to 101, Elise whispered. Marcus sat on the floor beside the chair. "You're an amazing mother." "I'm terrified most of the time," she admitted. "Every fever, every fall, every time they're too quiet or too fussy. I'm afraid I'm doing something wrong." "But you're not. Look at them, Elise. Look at how happy and confident they are." "You did that. We did that," she corrected softly. "Even when you weren't here, you were part of them. Emma has your stubbornness when she doesn't want to take medicine. Oliver has your way of studying problems until he figures them out." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter sleep. Outside, snow began to fall, creating a cocoon of quiet around them. "Marcus," Elise said eventually, "I've been thinking about what you said, about trying again." His heart stopped. "And? I'm scared, not of you, but of hoping for something and having it fall apart again, of letting the children get attached to the idea of a family, and then having to explain why Daddy's too busy for them." Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, and he hadn't even told her about the Singapore complication yet. "There's something I need to tell you about the sale." Elise's body tensed. "What?" "The best offer requires me to oversee operations in Singapore for 3 months, maybe 6. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Marcus watched as every fear she'd expressed about his priorities played out across her face. 3 months, she repeated flatly. "I don't have to take it. There's another offer. Lower, but how much lower? 2 billion less." Elise closed her eyes. "So you're already calculating whether we're worth $2 billion to you. That's not, Elise, that's not what this is about. That money would secure the children's future, your future. College, graduate school, whatever they want to do with their lives. What about their present? What about having a father who's actually here?" Emma stirred in her mother's arms, and they both fell silent, but the tension in the room was suffocating. "I don't know what to do," Marcus admitted. "Every choice feels like I'm failing someone." Elise stood up carefully, settling Emma back into her crib. When she turned to face Marcus, her expression was resolute. "Then maybe that's your answer," she said quietly. "Maybe the fact that you're even considering leaving for 6 months proves that you haven't really changed at all." The words hit Marcus like a slap, but before he could respond, Elise had walked out of the nursery, leaving him alone with his sleeping children and the devastating realization that he might be about to lose his family before he'd even had a real chance to fight for them. Marcus spent the rest of the night on Elise's couch, checking on Emma every hour while wrestling with the impossible decision that would define the rest of his life. By dawn, their daughter's fever had broken completely, but the tension between her parents remained thick enough to cut. Elise emerged from her bedroom at 6 a.m., already dressed for the day despite having gotten little sleep. She moved through the kitchen with mechanical precision, preparing bottles and breakfast while pointedly avoiding eye contact with Marcus. "How is she?" Elise asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Temperature's been normal since 4 a.m. She slept peacefully. Good. You can go now. I'm sure you have important meetings to attend." The dismissal stung, but Marcus deserved it. "Elise, we need to talk about this." "No, we don't." She finally looked at him, and the disappointment in her eyes was worse than anger would have been. "You've made your choice, just like you always do. I haven't made any choice yet. The fact that you're considering Singapore at all is a choice, Marcus. It tells me everything I need to know about your priorities." Before Marcus could respond, Oliver wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked between his parents, his 14-month-old intuition picking up on the tension, then walked directly to Marcus and raised his arms to be picked up. The simple gesture of trust from his son nearly undid Marcus completely. "Dada," Oliver said, patting Marcus's face with small, warm hands. "Good morning, buddy," Marcus whispered, his voice rougher than he intended. Elise watched the interaction with something that might have been pain before turning back to the bottles. "I'll have Richard draw up a custody agreement. Weekends, holidays, standard arrangements. Elise, I won't keep them from you, Marcus. But I also won't pretend that we can be a family when your business will always come first." Marcus set Oliver down gently and crossed the kitchen to where Elise stood with her back to him, her shoulders rigid with suppressed emotion. "What if I told you I was going to turn down both offers?" She went very still. "What? What if I kept the company but restructured everything? Sold off the international divisions, focused only on domestic consulting. It would be smaller, less profitable, but it would let me stay." Elise turned slowly, her expression guarded. "You'd give up $8 billion? I'd give up anything for this. For you. For them." For a moment, hope flickered in her eyes, but then her practical side reasserted itself. "And what happens in 5 years when you resent us for costing you your empire? What happens when another opportunity comes along that's too good to pass up? That won't happen. You can't know that." Her voice broke slightly. "People don't change overnight, Marcus. Especially not people who've spent their entire adult lives defining themselves by their achievements." Marcus reached for her hands, relieved when she didn't pull away. "You're right. I can't promise that I'll never be tempted by another deal or that I'll never make mistakes. But I can promise that you and Oliver and Emma will always come first. Every decision, every choice. It starts with what's best for our family." Elise searched his face, looking for the truth behind his words. "How do I know this isn't just another negotiation tactic? How do I know you won't change your mind when the reality of a smaller life sets in?" Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang. Richard Davidson's name appeared on the screen. "Don't answer it," Elise said quickly. "I have to. The deadline. If you answer that phone right now, while we're having this conversation, then you've already given me my answer." Marcus looked at the phone, then at Elise, then at Oliver, who was playing contentedly at their feet, completely unaware that his father's decision in the next 30 seconds would shape the rest of his life. Marcus declined the call and turned off his phone. "What does that prove?" Elise asked, though her voice was softer now. "It proves that this conversation is more important than any business deal. It proves that you're more important. One phone call doesn't erase a pattern, Marcus. Then let me show you. Not with words, but with actions. Every day, for as long as it takes." Emma's cry echoed from the nursery, and Elise started to move toward the sound. But Marcus caught her arm gently. "Let me," he said. He found Emma standing in her crib, fully recovered from her fever and apparently ready to start the day. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that hit him like sunshine. "Dada! Up!" Marcus lifted her, marveling at how light she felt, how perfectly she fit against his shoulder. As he carried her back to the kitchen, he made a silent promise that he would never again let business considerations outweigh moments like this. But when they returned to the kitchen, Elise was standing at the counter, her phone pressed to her ear, her face pale. "Yes, I understand," she was saying. "When do you need an answer?" She hung up and turned to Marcus with an expression he couldn't read. "Who was that?" he asked, though something in her posture made him suspect he didn't want to know. "Sterling Communications. They're offering me the VP position I interviewed for last month." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "I didn't know you were interviewing." "There's a lot you don't know about my life, Marcus. I've been trying to rebuild my career while raising 2 children alone. This position would give me the financial independence to support them without needing anything from you or your family's money." "Where is it?" Elise took a deep breath. San Francisco. They want me to start in 3 weeks. The irony was devastating. While Marcus had been agonizing over whether to leave for Singapore, Elise had been planning her own escape route. While he had been trying to figure out how to stay, she had been preparing to go. You're leaving? I don't know. The offer came through this morning before our conversation. I wasn't sure I was going to take it, but now what? Now I'm wondering if a fresh start might be better for all of us. No complicated history, no expectations, no one trying to change who they fundamentally are. Emma squirmed in Marcus's arms, reaching for her mother, and he handed her over with hands that weren't quite steady. So that's it? He asked. You're going to take the children 3,000 miles away rather than give us a chance? I'm going to do what's best for them. What's best for me? Oi, and I don't get a say in that decision? You get the same say I got when you were considering Singapore, Elise said quietly, which is to say, none at all. Marcus's phone, which he had forgotten was turned off, suddenly buzzed back to life with a series of missed calls and urgent messages. The deadline for his decision was in 4 hours, and Blackstone was demanding an immediate response. I have to go, he said, hating the words even as he spoke them. Of course you do. This isn't over, Elise. Maybe it should be. As Marcus kissed Oliver and Emma goodbye, he realized that he was facing the most complex negotiation of his life, one where everything he had ever wanted was on the line, and traditional business tactics would only make things worse. He had 4 hours to save his company or save his family. But as he walked out of Elise's apartment, Marcus suspected that he might not be able to save both. Marcus sat in his car outside Elise's building for 10 minutes, staring at his phone as missed calls and urgent messages poured in. Richard Davidson had called 7 times. Blackstone's representatives were threatening to withdraw their offer if they didn't hear from him within the hour. His entire financial future was collapsing in real time, and he had never felt more certain about anything in his life. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed, then pressed call. James, I need your help with something, and I need it now. An hour later, Marcus stood in the lobby of the Sterling Communications building in Manhattan, having used every connection and favor his brother could muster to get him in front of the company's CEO. His expensive suit was wrinkled from the sleepless night, his tie was crooked, and he looked nothing like the polished businessman who usually commanded these meetings. Mr. Halstead, said Catherine Sterling, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had built her agency from nothing into a powerhouse that represented Fortune 500 companies. I have to say, this is highly unusual. Elise Warren is an exceptional candidate, but I've never had a family member make a personal appeal regarding our hiring decisions. I'm not here as a family member, Marcus said, though the words felt strange on his tongue. I'm here as someone who's about to make you a business proposition you can't refuse. Catherine raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. You want Elise because she's brilliant, strategic, and has a track record of success. But what if I told you that you could have all of that without requiring her to relocate her entire life? The VP position is based in San Francisco, Mr. Halstead. That's non-negotiable. What if it didn't have to be? Marcus pulled out a folder he'd hastily assembled during the drive over. Halstead Strategic Consulting has been considering establishing an East Coast creative division. Communications, brand management, crisis response. Exactly the kind of work Elise excels at. Catherine leaned back in her chair. You're proposing a partnership? I'm proposing more than that. I want to hire Sterling Communications to handle all of HSC's brand management and strategic communications. Exclusively. A 5-year contract worth approximately $50 million in guaranteed revenue. The number hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus watched Catherine's expression change from polite interest to sharp attention. And in exchange, you allow Elise Warren to work remotely from New York as your VP of Strategic Communications for the East Coast Division. She gets the position, the salary, the responsibilities, everything except the relocation requirement. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, clearly running calculations in her head. That's a very expensive way to keep your ex-wife in town, Mr. Halstead. She's not my ex-wife yet, Marcus said quietly. And this isn't just about keeping her in New York. It's about recognizing that sometimes the best talent comes with complications that smart companies learn to accommodate. What guarantee do I have that this isn't some elaborate manipulation? That you won't use this contract as leverage over Ms. Warren or our company? Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a legal document he'd had his lawyers draft during the drive over. This contract includes a clause stating that if Elise Warren ever feels that I'm using our business relationship to influence her personal decisions, She can terminate my company's involvement immediately, while keeping her position and all benefits intact. Catherine read through the document quickly, her expression unreadable. You're giving her the power to destroy a $50 million deal. I'm giving her the protection she needs to make her own choices freely. Why? The simple question hit Marcus harder than any hostile takeover he'd ever faced. Because I spent 5 years of marriage trying to control every aspect of our relationship, and it cost me everything. I'm not going to make that mistake again. Catherine stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. You realize that if I accept this proposal, you'll essentially be subsidizing your own romantic life to the tune of $10 million a year? The best investment I've ever considered. She turned back to him with something that might have been admiration. I'll need to discuss this with my board, but Mr. Halstead, this is either the most romantic gesture I've ever witnessed, or the most expensive midlife crisis in corporate history. Maybe both, Marcus admitted. 40 minutes later, Marcus was back in his car, racing toward Brooklyn with a signed memorandum of understanding and a phone call to make that would change everything. He pulled over 3 blocks from Elise's apartment and dialed Richard Davidson. Marcus, thank God. Blackstone is furious. If you don't confirm within the next 20 minutes, tell them no. Silence. I'm sorry. What? Tell Blackstone that I'm declining their offer. Tell them I'm keeping my company. Marcus, you're making a mistake. This is $8 billion we're talking about. Richard. Marcus's voice was calm, final. I'm not selling. I'm restructuring. But I'm not selling. And I need you to draw up paperwork for a new strategic partnership with Sterling Communications. $50 million over 5 years. Have you lost your mind? Probably. But I found something more valuable than money. Marcus ended the call and sat in his car for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what he'd just done. He'd turned down the largest business deal of his career. He'd committed to a partnership that would tie up significant resources for years. He'd essentially bet his company's future on the hope that Elise would give them another chance. And he felt lighter than he had in years. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Sterling. Board approved. Calling Elise now to discuss the modified position. You're either a romantic genius or completely insane. Marcus smiled and typed back. Little of both. He drove to Elise's building and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering not with anxiety but with anticipation. For the first time in months, he felt like he was making the right choice for the right reasons. When Elise opened the door, she was holding her phone, her expression a mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope. Did you just, she began, create a $50 million job opportunity so you wouldn't have to move to San Francisco? Marcus finished. Yes, that's insane. That's love. The words hung between them, simple and true and more powerful than any business proposal he'd ever made. Marcus, you can't just throw money at problems and expect them to disappear. I'm not throwing money at a problem. I'm investing in a solution. I'm proving that when I say you and the children come first, I mean it in every way that matters. Elise stepped aside to let him in, and Marcus could see Oliver and Emma playing in the living room, their laughter filling the small apartment with warmth and life. You turned down Singapore, she said. It wasn't a question. I turned down everything. The sale, Singapore, all of it. I'm keeping the company, but I'm restructuring it around what matters most. Which is? Marcus looked at his children, then back at the woman he'd never stopped loving, even when he'd been too blind to show it. This, he said simply. All of this. Everything I almost lost because I was too stupid to realize I already had everything I needed. For the first time in months, Elise smiled, really smiled, and Marcus felt like he could breathe again. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself in an unexpected place, sitting on the floor of Elise's living room at 7 a.m., covered in finger paint, and listening to Oliver attempt to teach him the correct way to build a block tower. No, Dada, Oliver said with the patient exasperation of a 15-month-old who clearly knew better. Big one down. Marcus dutifully placed the larger block at the bottom, marveling at how his son's engineering instincts were already more advanced than some of the consultants he'd worked with over the years. Elise emerged from the kitchen with coffee and a smile that was becoming more frequent but still held traces of caution. The past few weeks had been a careful dance between them, moments of warmth interrupted by uncertainty, progress followed by setbacks as they both struggled to believe that this time might be different. Sterling called this morning, she said, settling onto the couch with Emma, who was contentedly destroying a board book about farm animals. The East Coast division is exceeding all projections. They want to discuss expanding my role. That's amazing. Marcus meant it. though he was still learning to celebrate Elise's successes without immediately thinking about how they might affect his own plans. They also mentioned that having your company as a foundational client has opened doors they never expected. 3 Fortune 500 companies have reached out about similar arrangements. Marcus looked up from his block tower, which Oliver had deemed satisfactory enough to begin decorating with toy cars. Are you worried about the partnership becoming too successful? I'm worried about you thinking you bought my forgiveness. The honesty hit Marcus like cold water. They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks, but Elise's directness forced them to finally address the elephant in the room. Did I? He asked quietly. Elise was quiet for a moment, watching Emma attempt to fit a square block through a round hole with the determined persistence she'd inherited from both her parents. No, she said finally, but you did buy me time. Time to see if you really meant what you said about changing. Time to see if you could love us more than you love winning. And what's the verdict? Instead of answering directly, Elise stood up and walked to the window where she could see Marcus's new car parked outside. A practical SUV with car seat anchors and space for strollers. A far cry from the luxury vehicles he'd always preferred. Yesterday you turned down a meeting with potential investors because it was during Emma's nap time, she said. 2 weeks ago you canceled a dinner with the Japanese delegation because Oliver had a doctor's appointment. Last week, you spent 3 hours on the phone with your restructuring team because you wanted to make sure none of your employees would lose their jobs during the transition. Marcus joined her at the window. Those all seem like normal decisions. They are normal. That's what makes them extraordinary coming from you. She turned to face him, and Marcus saw something in her expression he hadn't seen since the early days of their relationship. Trust, fragile, but genuine. I'm starting to believe that the man I fell in love with isn't gone, she continued. He was just buried under years of thinking that love meant providing rather than being present. I want to be present, Marcus said. For everything. First steps, first words, first days of school. I don't want to miss anything else. What about first heartbreaks, first failures? The moments when parenting is hard and thankless and nothing like the business world where problems have clear solutions. Marcus considered this seriously. Those especially. I want to be the person they come to when the world doesn't make sense. I want to be the father who teaches them that failure isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of the next chapter. Emma chose that moment to toddle over to them, having apparently solved the shape-sorting puzzle through the advanced technique of hitting it until the pieces fit. She held up her arms to Marcus, who lifted her without thinking. Data fix, she announced, pointing to her toy. You fixed it yourself, Marcus told her. You're brilliant. Like Mama, Emma declared with the certainty of someone who had clearly been told this before. Like Mama, Marcus agreed, catching Elise's eye over their daughter's head. That afternoon they took the twins to Prospect Park, a routine that had become precious to Marcus in ways his younger self never could have understood. Watching Oliver chase pigeons with single-minded determination while Emma provided running commentary on every dog they encountered felt more valuable than any deal he'd ever closed. I have something to tell you, Elise said as they sat on a bench while the twins played in a fenced toddler area. Marcus felt his stomach clench. Despite the progress they'd made, he still braced himself for bad news, for some sign that his efforts weren't enough. I called a lawyer yesterday, she continued. Marcus's heart stopped. About custody? About the divorce papers. The words hung between them like a challenge. Marcus had stopped asking about the unsigned documents weeks ago, afraid that pushing would undo the fragile progress they'd made. I told him I wanted them withdrawn, Elise said quietly. Marcus felt the world shift around him. Withdrawn? I don't want a divorce, Marcus. I want a marriage. A real one this time, where we're partners instead of strangers who happen to live in the same house. Elise. Marcus turned to face her fully, hardly believing what he was hearing. But I have conditions. Anything. We start over completely. We date, we get to know each other again, we build something new instead of trying to fix something that was broken from the beginning. We move slowly, Marcus said, understanding. We do this right. And if it doesn't work, if you slip back into old patterns or if I can't learn to trust you completely, we get divorced and share custody of the children. No drama, no fighting. Just two people who tried and couldn't make it work. Marcus nodded, though the thought of failing again made his chest tight with anxiety. And if it does work? Elise smiled, and this time there was no caution in it, just hope and possibility, and something that looked like love. If it works, Then we have the rest of our lives to figure out what we could have been if we'd gotten it right the first time. Oliver chose that moment to run over to them, having apparently decided that his parents needed to see his latest discovery, a stick that was perfectly suited for drawing in the dirt. "Look, Mama. Look, Dada," he announced, beaming with pride, as Marcus watched his son show off his treasure, then looked at Emma, who was carefully arranging leaves into what appeared to be a very important pattern, and finally, at Elise, who was watching their children with the same amazed love that Marcus felt overwhelming him every day. He realized that he already had everything he'd ever really wanted. He just hadn't been smart enough to recognize it the first time around. "I love you," he said to Elise. The word simple but weighted with months of change and growth and the kind of hope he'd thought he'd lost forever. "I love you too," she replied. "All of you. The man you were, the father you've become, and the person you're still becoming." As they gathered up toys and children and headed home together, really together, for the first time in almost 2 years, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since the day the twins were born, the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the nursery of his renovated penthouse, watching Elise help Oliver and Emma explore their new bedroom. The space bore no resemblance to the cold, minimalist apartment he'd once called home. Warm colors, soft fabrics, and child-safe everything had transformed it into a place where laughter echoed off the walls and family photos covered every surface. The twins, now 20 months old and impossibly more verbal, were conducting a serious inspection of their new toys. Oliver had claimed the bookshelf as his domain, methodically removing each book to examine it before carefully replacing it in a different order. Emma had discovered that the rocking chair made delightful squeaking sounds when she pushed it back and forth. "What do you think?" Marcus asked Elise, who was hanging the last of their children's artwork on the wall. "I think," she said, stepping back to admire a particularly abstract finger painting that Emma had created, "that this feels like home." The word carried weight they both understood. For months they had been building toward this moment. Not just the physical move, but the emotional journey of becoming a family. They had dated like teenagers, stealing quiet dinners after the twins were asleep. They had attended couples therapy, working through years of miscommunication and misplaced priorities. They had learned to fight fairly and love completely. Most importantly, they had learned to be partners. "Dada, look!" Oliver appeared at Marcus's side, holding up a picture book about construction vehicles. "Trucks. Very impressive trucks," Marcus agreed, settling onto the floor to examine the book properly. This was a ritual he'd learned to treasure, Oliver's systematic review of every piece of literature that entered his sphere. Emma abandoned her rocking chair project and toddled over to join them, climbing into Marcus's lap with the confidence of a child who had never doubted her welcome there. "Story, Dada. Which story would you like?" "Princess story," Emma declared, while Oliver simultaneously requested, "Truck story. How about a story about a princess who drives trucks?" Marcus suggested, earning delighted giggles from both children. As he launched into an improvised tale about Princess Emma and her trusty truck driver brother Oliver, Marcus caught Elise watching them with an expression of complete contentment. She had been right to insist they start over, right to demand that he prove his commitment through actions rather than words. The past 6 months had been the hardest and most rewarding of his life. Restructuring his company had been complex, but learning to restructure his priorities had been revolutionary. He still worked long hours, but they were hours that fit around family dinners and bedtime stories. He still traveled for business, but never for more than 3 days at a time, and always with video calls home that featured 2 small faces pressed against a phone screen. And then Princess Emma used her magical truck to build a bridge to the moon, Marcus concluded his story, where she and Prince Oliver lived happily ever after, with all the other truck-driving princesses. "More," both children demanded in unison. After dinner, Elise intervened, appearing with a bottle for Emma and a sippy cup for Oliver. "We still need to finish unpacking, and someone needs to check that all the baby-proofing is working properly." As if summoned by the mention of baby-proofing, Oliver immediately made a beeline for the electrical outlet covers, apparently viewing them as a puzzle that needed solving. Emma, meanwhile, had discovered that the safety latches on the dresser drawers made interesting clicking sounds. "I'll take point on Oliver," Marcus said, scooping up his son before he could successfully remove the outlet cover. "You handle our future locksmith." They spent the next hour in the comfortable chaos of family life, redirecting curious toddlers, unpacking the last boxes, and marveling at how quickly the twins adapted to their new environment. By evening, when the children were finally asleep in their new cribs, Marcus and Elise found themselves alone in the living room for the first time all day. "No regrets?" Elise asked, curling up next to him on the couch they'd chosen together. Soft enough for children to play on, elegant enough for the rare occasions when they entertained adults. "About which part? Restructuring my entire life? Moving you and the children into my space, or agreeing to co-host your mother's visit next weekend?" "All of the above." Marcus pulled her closer, still amazed that he was allowed this. The simple pleasure of holding the woman he loved while their children slept safely down the hall. "No regrets," he said firmly. "Even about your mother's visit." "Liar. Okay, maybe some concerns about your mother's visit, but no regrets about anything else." Elise was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could sense that she was building up to something important. "I have something for you," she said finally, reaching for an envelope on the coffee table. Marcus recognized the legal stationery immediately. "Elise, open it." With hands that weren't quite steady, Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out a single document. It wasn't what he'd expected. Instead of divorce papers or custody agreements, he found himself looking at a marriage license application. "I thought," Elise said softly, "that if we're going to start over completely, we should do it right this time. A real wedding, with the children there, with vows that actually mean something to who we are now instead of who we thought we were supposed to be." Marcus stared at the paper, overwhelmed by the simple beauty of what she was proposing. Their first wedding had been a corporate event disguised as a celebration, all elegant surfaces and careful orchestration. The idea of marrying Elise again, this time with full knowledge of what marriage actually required, felt like the most important business deal he'd ever been offered. "Are you proposing to me?" he asked. "I'm proposing to the man who turned down $8 billion to build block towers with his son. I'm proposing to the father who knows that Emma's favorite story involves princesses with jobs, and that Oliver needs exactly 3 books read before he'll go to sleep. I'm proposing to my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life." Marcus set the marriage license aside and cupped her face in his hands. "Yes, I haven't asked the question yet. The answer is yes to whatever you're about to ask. Yes to marrying you again. Yes to building a life together. Yes to growing old while our children drive us crazy and make us proud and teach us things we never knew we needed to learn." Elise smiled, and Marcus saw their entire future in that expression. Years of chaos and love, challenges and triumphs. The beautiful complexity of a life built around something larger than individual ambition. "Marcus Halstead," she said formally, "will you marry me? For real this time, with full knowledge that I will never be the quiet corporate wife who stays in the background, and that our children will always come first, and that love is a choice you have to make every single day?" "Elise Warren," Marcus replied. "I thought you'd never ask." When they kissed, it tasted like promises they were finally ready to keep, and dreams they were brave enough to build together. From down the hall came the soft sound of Emma talking to her stuffed animals and Oliver's gentle snoring, and Marcus thought that this perfect, chaotic, complicated life was worth more than any empire he could ever build. Outside, New York City hummed with the endless energy of people chasing their dreams, but inside their home, Marcus had already found everything he'd been searching for without even knowing it. He had found his family, his purpose, and the woman who had taught him that the most successful life wasn't measured in profits or achievements, but in the love you gave and received along the way. And for the first time in his 46 years, Marcus Halstead knew exactly what success looked like. 5 years later, the October sun filtered through the windows of the Halstead family's Westchester home, illuminating a kitchen that bore the beautiful chaos of a Saturday morning with 3 children. Emma, now 6 years old, sat at the breakfast table explaining to her younger brother why cereal belonged in a bowl rather than sorted by color on the placemat. Daddy, Oliver, also 6 but 2 minutes older and infinitely more serious, addressed Marcus while consulting a picture book about marine biology. "Do whales really sing to each other?" Marcus looked up from where he was attempting to negotiate with 3-year-old Sophie about the necessity of wearing pants to her gymnastics class. "They do. They have whole conversations across the ocean, like when Mommy calls Grandma in California." "Exactly like that." Elise appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing jeans and a paint-splattered sweater. At 39, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had learned to balance motherhood, marriage, and a thriving career without sacrificing any of them. The whales don't complain about long-distance charges, she said, kissing the top of Oliver's head before moving to help Sophie with her shoes. Marcus watched his wife with the same sense of wonder he felt every morning when he woke up next to her. 3 years of marriage, their second real marriage, had been everything their first attempt should have been. They fought about normal things, whose turn it was to handle bedtime stories, whether Sophie was old enough for a two-wheeler, and how to explain to the twins that their little sister couldn't actually fly, despite her insistence that she had inherited superhero powers. "Daddy, Sophie won't share the good crayons," Emma reported with the weary tone of someone who had clearly been dealing with injustice all morning. "Sophie," Marcus said gently, "what do we say about sharing?" Their youngest daughter looked up at him with Elise's bright eyes and his own stubborn chin. "Sharing is caring, but purple is my favorite. You can have purple, but Emma gets to pick her favorite color too." Sophie considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice, then handed Emma a blue crayon. "Blue is pretty too." Crisis averted. Marcus returned to packing lunches while Elise gathered gymnastics gear and Oliver continued his whale research. This was their life now. Beautifully ordinary, wonderfully chaotic, and more fulfilling than any corporate achievement Marcus had ever accomplished. His company, now focused exclusively on sustainable business practices and family-friendly corporate policies, had become a model for other firms looking to prioritize both profit and people. The Sterling Communications partnership had evolved into something more valuable than either company had imagined, a collaboration that had redefined how businesses could support working parents. But the real measure of Marcus's success wasn't in quarterly reports or industry recognition. It was in moments like this. Sophie's gap-toothed grin when she successfully tied her shoes, Oliver's excitement about sharing whale facts with anyone who would listen, and Emma's careful attention to making sure everyone felt included. "Daddy," Emma said as they loaded into the family SUV for the drive to gymnastics, "are you coming to my soccer game this afternoon?" "Wouldn't miss it," Marcus replied, and meant it in a way that still surprised him. 5 years ago, he would have been calculating whether the game conflicted with more important commitments. Now he understood that there were no more important commitments. At the gymnastics center, Marcus and Elise sat in the observation area, watching Sophie tumble across mats with fearless enthusiasm, while the twins played quietly with educational apps on Elise's tablet. "Remember when our biggest worry was getting Emma to sleep through the night?" Elise asked, settling against Marcus's shoulder. "Now our biggest worry is whether Sophie will break her neck attempting to teach herself backflips. She gets that from you. The risk-taking or the stubbornness? Both." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter discover the joy of movement while their older children debated the relative merits of different crayon brands. Around them, other parents juggled coffee cups and work calls, the universal dance of modern parenthood playing out in countless variations. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from James. "Family dinner Sunday? Rebecca wants to show off her engagement ring to the kids." Marcus showed the text to Elise. "Uncle James is getting married." "About time," Emma said without looking up from her coloring. "Rebecca makes good cookies." "That's definitely the most important qualification for marriage," Elise agreed solemnly. As they drove home later that afternoon, Sophie fell asleep in her car seat, exhausted from her gymnastic adventures. The twins discussed their weekend plans with the organizational skills they'd inherited from both parents, and Marcus found himself thinking about the path that had led them here. 5 years ago, he had nearly lost everything because he didn't understand what he actually had. He had defined himself by achievements that felt important, but ultimately meant nothing without people to share them with. Now his greatest achievement was the fact that Emma ran to him first when she scored a goal, that Oliver sought his opinion on everything from whale songs to breakfast cereal, and that Sophie had never known a world where her father wasn't completely present in her life. "What are you thinking about?" Elise asked as they pulled into their driveway. "Just this. All of this. How different everything is from where I thought I'd be. Better or worse?" Marcus looked back at their sleeping daughter, then at the twins who were now debating whether clouds were made of cotton candy, then at the woman who had given him the courage to become the man he'd always had the potential to be. "Better," he said simply. "So much better than I ever imagined possible." That evening, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Marcus and Elise sat on their back porch, watching the stars appear over their suburban neighborhood. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had signed those divorce papers?" Elise asked. "Sometimes," Marcus admitted, "but I try not to think about it too much. I prefer focusing on what did happen." "Which is?" I learned that the most successful life isn't the one where you accumulate the most achievements. It's the one where you love completely, show up consistently, and understand that the small moments are actually the biggest ones. Elise reached for his hand. And the moral of our story? Marcus smiled, thinking of all the bedtime stories he'd told over the years, all the lessons wrapped in tales of princesses and trucks and whales who sang across oceans. The moral of our story, he said, is that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that look like mistakes from the outside, and sometimes the greatest success comes from giving up everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually needed. I love our story. I love our story too. And as they sat together under the stars, surrounded by the life they had built through second chances and stubborn hope, Marcus understood that this was what happily ever after actually looked like. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worthwhile. Not an ending, but a beginning that continued to unfold with each new day. Sometimes love requires losing everything to understand what truly matters. Marcus thought he needed control, success, and recognition, but what he actually needed was the courage to choose family over fortune, presence over prestige, and love over everything else. What choice would you make if faced with Marcus's dilemma? Would you have the strength to walk away from billions for the chance at real happiness? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.